I'm Emily 32F, and I've been a professional wedding planner for almost a decade. I've handled all kinds of brides, some sweet, some nightmare level entitled, but nothing could have prepared me for my own sister, Jessica 28F, and the absolute disaster that was her wedding. Jessica has always been the golden child. Growing up, she never heard the word no. If she threw a tantrum, she got what she wanted. If she messed up, our parents made excuses for her. Meanwhile, I had to be the responsible one, the one who didn't cause problems, the one who sucked it up and handled things. Over time, I learned to keep my distance and focus on my own life, but Jessica never really grew up. So when she announced her engagement to Matt 30M, I knew, deep in my soul, that it was going to be a problem for me. Jessica wanted a huge wedding, over the top, expensive, Instagram-worthy. The issue? She and Matt had limited funds and no structured budget. Jessica assumed she could get discounts, borrow money, and figure it out along the way. And worse, she fully expected me to plan the entire thing for free. It started with a family dinner. Jessica and Matt had just gotten engaged, and my parents wanted to celebrate. Everyone was in a good mood, toasting their future, when Jessica turned to me with a big smile. "I don't even have to stress about planning," she said. "Emily's got it covered." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She immediately launched into ideas: floral arches, chandeliers, a 5-star venue, custom bridesmaid dresses, live music. Every word out of her mouth screamed expensive. I waited for her to mention a budget. She didn't. So I asked, "What's your budget looking like?" Jessica waved a hand. "We'll figure that out later. I mean, I'm not worried since you'll be handling everything." That's when I realized she was serious. She actually thought I was going to plan her entire wedding for free. I reminded her that wedding planning is my job. It's how I pay my bills. I told her I'd be happy to help in small ways, like recommending vendors or giving advice, but I couldn't plan the whole thing for free. Jessica immediately went into victim mode. "Wow, so strangers get your time, but your own sister doesn't? I thought family was supposed to support each other." Before I could respond, my mom chimed in. "Oh, come on, Emily. It's her wedding. You're really going to make her pay? Just do it as a gift." I looked at Matt, expecting him to step in, but he just sat there, awkward and silent. I stayed firm. I can't do an entire wedding for free. I can offer a discount, but I can't do it all. Jessica's mood shifted instantly. Her voice went sharp. "After everything I've done for you? I helped you move. I watched your dog that one time." I blinked. "You mean the time you let him pee on my couch because you didn't take him outside?" That set her off. She started going on about how selfish I was, how I didn't appreciate her, how I was ruining her wedding dreams. And of course, my parents took her side. By the end of dinner, I was the villain. The next few weeks were hell. Jessica refused to speak to me, but she had no problem talking about me. She posted vague messages on social media about family betrayal, and some people only care about money. Our extended family started calling and texting, telling me to just do it for her. Apparently, I was ruining her once-in-a-lifetime moment over something as silly as money. At one point, my mom actually begged me to apologize. "Just tell her you'll do it," she said. "She's under so much stress." I refused. Weeks passed, and suddenly Jessica was back. She sent a cheerful text like nothing had happened. "Hey sis, let's grab coffee and talk wedding stuff." So excited I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't sorry, she just realized she couldn't plan a wedding without my help. But I decided to play along. If Jessica wanted free wedding planning, she was going to get exactly what she paid for. Jessica's sudden change in attitude was almost comical. After weeks of the silent treatment and social media posts about fake family, she popped back up like nothing happened. She sent a text full of exclamation points, talking about how excited she was to finally start planning the wedding together. I already knew what was happening. She wasn't apologizing, she was just out of options. Still, I played along. We met for coffee, and she immediately launched into her new strategy. This time, she wasn't demanding I plan everything. She was acting like she only needed a little guidance. Just some recommendations, a bit of advice here and there. Nothing major. I nodded, sipped my drink, and let her talk. Then came the first jab. She laughed and said it was so crazy that her own sister wouldn't do more to help, but she'd make it work somehow. She even mentioned how her friend's sister planned her wedding for free. I smiled and told her to start by figuring out her budget. Jessica had no budget. She wanted a luxury wedding but assumed she could cut costs by getting deals and DIYing things. I told her the reality: big weddings cost money. There are no secret industry discounts. If she wanted quality vendors, she needed to pay them. She waved me off and asked for my contacts. I gave her a few names, but that was it. I didn't call anyone, negotiate, or set up meetings for her. She had to handle it herself. Within a week, the complaints started rolling in. The florists were too expensive. The caterers wouldn't work with her. The venue she wanted required a massive deposit. She called me, frustrated. "I thought you knew people." I reminded her that vendors don't give out free services just because someone's sister is a wedding planner. She huffed and said she'd handle things herself. Then came the dress disaster. She picked out a designer dress that was thousands over her budget, then looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to fix it. I shrugged. Maybe look for a cheaper option. She was not happy. Determined to save money, she decided to DIY everything. Invitations, decor, centerpieces, except she had zero artistic ability. She tried to hand paint wedding signs, but the lettering was wobbly, and the paint smeared. She attempted floral arrangements, but the flowers wilted because she didn't store them properly. She bought discount table runners that arrived wrinkled and fraying at the edges. I warned her, again, that some things are worth paying for. She rolled her eyes and called me negative. Then came the venue disaster. She found a place she loved and put down a non-refundable deposit without checking contract details. 2 weeks later, she changed her mind and wanted me to fix it. I told her there was nothing to fix. The deposit was gone. That's when she started to panic. She came over, sat on my couch, and started venting about how stressful everything was. Matt was frustrated with her. Vendors weren't responding. Things were piling up. I listened, waiting for the moment she would ask for real help. Sure enough, she sighed dramatically and said, "Maybe you could just step in and take over a little?" I shook my head. She stared at me, eyes wide. I reminded her again that she chose this. She was not happy. The next day, Mom called. She's overwhelmed, Emily. Can't you just fix things for her? I told her the same thing I told Jessica. Then came the final disaster. Jessica had ignored my advice about getting contracts in writing. She assumed things were set up, but vendors weren't officially booked. One by one, they backed out. The florist? Gone. The DJ? Booked somewhere else. The caterer? Raised their price after she took too long. Jessica panicked. Matt's family had been watching in concern, and his mother finally stepped in, asking if he was sure about moving forward with this. Matt, for the first time, tried to intervene, suggesting they hire a professional last minute, but Jessica snapped at him, saying it was too late. She texted me, called me, begged me to help. I repeated the same words I'd been telling her for months. You get what you pay for. Jessica had never actually confirmed a florist, just assumed one of the vendors she spoke to was holding the date for her. They weren't. By the time she realized every decent florist in the area was fully booked, she panicked and started calling random places, begging for last-minute arrangements. The only ones available were either ridiculously overpriced or low-quality fake flowers. She settled on some cheap grocery store bouquets, but they barely covered half the tables. Then came the catering disaster. Jessica had gone with the cheapest caterer she could find, ignoring every warning I gave her about contracts, and naturally, they backed out at the last minute. Apparently, they had double-booked the date and took the better-paying job. With days to go, she scrambled for alternatives, but her budget was stretched thin. She ended up hiring a small local restaurant to do a buffet, but they could only provide basic trays of food, nothing fancy. And then the dress. The dress she had to have, the one that was way over budget, it finally arrived, and it didn't fit. The alterations she assumed were being done, never scheduled. She tried squeezing into it, but the zipper barely went up, and the sleeves were too long. She called the boutique, but at this point, there was no time to fix it. Her solution? Crash diet and pray. Meanwhile, I got a text from one of her bridesmaids. She was dropping out. Apparently, Jessica had been making endless demands, forcing them to redo their dresses, insisting on last-minute changes, expecting them to foot the bill for extra things. They were over it. By the end of the day, 2 more bridesmaids backed out. Jessica was furious. She blamed everyone but herself. Then, Matt called me. He sounded exhausted. I don't know what to do anymore, he admitted. I've tried getting Jessica to plan properly, but she just keeps brushing me off. He had asked his groomsmen to step in, even suggested hiring a professional at the last minute, but Jessica refused to hear it. Now, with the wedding just days away, the chaos was fully sinking in. He asked me, almost pleading, to step in and help. I told him no. Jessica had made it clear she didn't need a planner. She wanted to do things her way. A few hours later, Mom called. She was demanding that I fix things. Your sister is having a breakdown. Just step in, do something. I repeated the same thing I told everyone else. You get what you pay for. Jessica was still holding on to her DIY dream, but at this point, it was looking rough. The table centerpieces were uneven and lopsided. The signage she painted had streaky letters. The homemade wedding favors looked like something from a kid's craft project. She spent 2 nights before the wedding trying to salvage everything, staying up late gluing, recutting, redecorating. It wasn't working. Meanwhile, word was spreading. Guests were whispering about how chaotic everything was. Matt's family in particular was horrified. Then, the music issue hit. Jessica never actually booked a DJ. She thought she could just find someone closer to the date. By the time she checked, no one was available. With no entertainment planned, Matt suggested using a Bluetooth speaker and a playlist. Jessica lost it. By now, the stress was getting to her. She was snapping at everyone, blaming everyone, throwing tantrums, and then she made her final desperate move. She showed up at my place, eyes red, voice shaking. Please, she begged, just help me fix this. I looked at her. This was the moment she finally admitted she needed me. But it was too late. I repeated the words I'd been telling her all along. This is what a free planner gets you. She lost it, screaming, crying, telling me I ruined everything. Matt stood behind her, arms crossed, watching. For the first time, he looked like a man rethinking everything. And the wedding hadn't even happened yet. The wedding day arrived, and from the moment the sun rose, it was a disaster. Jessica had chosen an outdoor venue with no backup plan, no tents, no covered areas, just an open garden. The weather forecast? Heavy rain. By noon, dark clouds rolled in. By the time guests started arriving, the rain poured. People scrambled for cover under trees, huddling under whatever umbrellas they had. The cheap, flimsy DIY decorations Jessica spent weeks working on, soaked. The watercolor signs she painted, smudged beyond recognition. And then the seating chaos began. Jessica never arranged a seating chart, assuming people would just figure it out. They didn't. Guests wandered around, confused, asking where they were supposed to sit. Elderly relatives stood around awkwardly, waiting for someone to guide them. The venue staff asked who was in charge. Jessica? Too busy screaming at the rain. Matt? Nowhere to be found. Then, the florist mess came to light. Jessica's last-minute plan? Buy discount flowers and arrange them herself the morning of the wedding. She ran out of time, threw them together in a panic, and ended up with sad, wilted, uneven bouquets. When she saw how bad they looked, she threw them on the ground in frustration. But the real disaster? The caterer. The cheap replacement she hired last minute was supposed to arrive by 3 p.m. They didn't show. By 4 p.m., still nothing. Guests were hungry, wet, and grumpy. Jessica called them, screaming into the phone. They said they were on their way. They finally showed up at 5:30 p.m., with half the food missing. Apparently, they had another event and ran out of supplies. Now, not only were people soaked and miserable, but half of them didn't even get a meal. Meanwhile, the bridesmaids, the ones who stuck around, were done. They stood in the corner, arms crossed, refusing to lift a finger. Jessica had treated them horribly for months, so now, they let her sink. Jessica's meltdown was building. And then, Mom snapped. She burst into tears in front of everyone, complained loudly about how she couldn't believe this was happening and how all of Jessica's dreams were ruined. People stared. Then came the venue manager. They pulled Jessica aside. The event had gone completely off schedule, and because she didn't communicate anything, the staff had no idea what was happening. They were threatening to cut the night short if things didn't get organized immediately. Meanwhile, Matt's family, watching in horror. His parents sat at their table, whispering to each other, looking beyond uncomfortable. His mother at one point shook her head and sighed. Then came Jessica's dress disaster. It still didn't fit. The zipper barely stayed up. She kept tugging at it, fuming. It was too late to fix it. Her solution? Pinning the back together with safety pins. By now, guests were checking their watches. Some were already leaving, grumbling about the rain, the missing food, the lack of music. And speaking of music, no DJ. Jessica thought I'd book one. I didn't. Her backup plan? A Bluetooth speaker. Halfway through the night, the music randomly stopped, and nobody knew how to fix it. By now, guests were whispering about how bad everything was. And then, the final humiliation. People started taking photos. They posted on social media. Pictures of the ruined decorations, the empty buffet tables, the bridesmaids standing off to the side, refusing to help. It was all over Instagram and Facebook before the night even ended. Jessica? Livid. She stormed up to me, blaming me for everything. The vendors, the weather, the food, the guests leaving early. All my fault, apparently. I didn't react. I just repeated the same thing I'd been saying for months. This is what a free planner gets you. Matt? Silent. But I saw it in his face. The realization. The regret. And at that moment, I knew. This wedding wasn't just a disaster. This marriage wasn't going to last. The wedding was over, but the real fallout had just begun. Jessica and Matt had planned a honeymoon, a luxury beach resort in Mexico. Except there was one problem. Jessica couldn't afford it. Between all the last-minute vendor replacements, the overpriced food, and the rushed DIY disasters, she had burned through whatever little budget she had. She tried to move things around, but the resort wouldn't refund the deposit, and there wasn't enough money left for flights, activities, or even the hotel balance. So instead of sipping cocktails by the ocean, Jessica spent the first week of her marriage sulking at home. And Matt? He barely spoke to her. By the second week, Matt started pulling away. He stayed at work longer. He went out with friends more. He stopped responding to her constant texts as quickly. Jessica tried to pretend everything was fine. She posted filtered photos of the wedding, carefully avoiding the disaster shots that had already been spreading online. But people weren't fooled. Friends and family had been there. They saw the chaos. They heard the whispers. They watched the disaster unfold in real time. And then there was social media. Some guests, especially Matt's side, had posted about the wedding. One of the bridesmaids made a not-so-subtle post. I've been to some messy weddings before, but this one takes the cake. A distant cousin uploaded a picture of the soaked decorations with the caption, DIY isn't for everyone. And then, someone no one knows who uploaded a full breakdown of the disaster to a wedding Facebook group. People ate it up. Complete strangers were commenting, laughing, calling it the worst wedding story they've ever heard. Jessica, mortified, she went into damage control mode, trying to rewrite history. She told people it wasn't her fault. The vendors scammed her. The weather betrayed her. The guests were ungrateful. And of course, her favorite excuse, I sabotaged her. At least, that's what she told our parents. They tried to guilt trip me, again, saying I should have just helped a little, and that I should feel bad for how things turned out. I didn't. Because while Jessica was drowning in embarrassment, I was getting calls from people who had been at the wedding. Matt's cousins, some of them had engaged friends who now wanted to hire a real planner. Me. Even some old classmates who heard the story through the grapevine reached out. My business? Gaining some unexpected attention. While I had a few inquiries from guests who wanted to avoid a similar disaster, I was also getting messages questioning whether I had set Jessica up. Meanwhile, Jessica? Falling apart. And so was her marriage. Matt had seen it all firsthand. He knew how reckless she had been, how disorganized, how quick she was to blame everyone but herself. And slowly he checked out. At first it was small things. He stopped engaging in conversations. He left the house more. He stopped tagging Jessica in posts. Then, the real signs started showing. He canceled plans with her. He spent weekends at his parents' house. And one day, he finally admitted it. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be married anymore. Jessica? Lost it. She begged. She screamed. She tried to guilt him into staying. But Matt, done. 1 month after the wedding, Matt moved out. 2 months later, he filed for divorce. Jessica spiraled. She called everyone she could, trying to get people on her side. Mom? Still defending her. Dad? Silent. Extended family? Avoiding her. People had seen too much. And me? I moved on. A small part of me wondered if I could have done more, if standing my ground had been too harsh. But then I remembered the months of manipulation, the entitlement, the way she tried to destroy my business afterward. Jessica had every chance to fix this, and she threw them all away. I let out a breath and moved on. Nothing. The wedding had been a disaster, the honeymoon never happened, and within weeks, Matt had checked out completely. At first, he was just distant, working late, making excuses, avoiding long conversations. Then he started staying away more and more. He crashed at his parents' house some nights. Jessica would call, texting nonstop, but he barely responded. The tension boiled over when Jessica's financial nightmare hit full force. Turns out she had taken out multiple loans for the wedding, maxed out credit cards, and completely drained her savings. She went to our parents, begging for help. At first, Mom tried to reason with Dad, saying Jessica had been through a lot. But when Dad refused, she hesitated before finally relenting. Jessica, we've done everything we could for you. It's time to fix this yourself, she said, though her voice was softer than firm. Jessica lost it. She started blaming everyone. the vendors, the guests, me, and of course Matt. Meanwhile, Matt's parents weren't blind to what was happening. They sat him down for a talk, the kind of talk that makes someone rethink their entire life. They pointed out how reckless Jessica was, how she had burned bridges with friends, how her social media meltdowns weren't a good look, and how, maybe, just maybe, this was a sign that their marriage was a huge mistake. Then, out of nowhere, Matt reached out to me. It wasn't a long conversation, just a simple, almost defeated message, "You were right." Jessica, meanwhile, was in full-blown damage control mode. She told everyone Matt was emotionally abusive, that he had changed after the wedding, that he wasn't being supportive of her financial struggles, and of course she found a way to blame me. Apparently I had set her up for failure. That's when things got worse, because the wedding disaster went viral. Some wedding guest, no one knows who, wrote a post on Reddit about the worst wedding I've ever attended. It blew up. Thousands of people read it. The comments dragged Jessica. People laughed at the lack of food, the rain disaster, the Bluetooth speaker playlist, the fact that her own bridesmaids abandoned her. Jessica saw it. At first, she tried to downplay it, laughing it off as exaggerated rumors. But as more and more people commented, she began scrambling for control. She posted long-winded explanations, painting herself as a victim of bad luck and sabotage, but few bought it. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who she was talking about. And then, the final nail in the coffin. Matt discovered that Jessica had taken out a loan in his name. She had lied to him, using his information to get extra money for the wedding. That was it. Matt filed for divorce just 6 weeks after the wedding. He had also spoken to a lawyer about the loan Jessica had taken out in his name, and while he couldn't annul the marriage, he had grounds to sue for fraud. Jessica? Shattered. She showed up drunk at our parents' house, screaming and crying about how everyone was against her. Mom called me, pleading with me to talk to Matt and convince him to stay. I didn't even respond. Meanwhile, Jessica tried to win Matt back. She love-bombed him, grand gestures, long messages, promises that she would change. But Matt, already done. While her life crumbled, mine was thriving. The viral wedding disaster story? It actually brought business my way. People started reaching out, saying they never wanted to end up like Jessica and needed a real planner. Jessica, on the other hand, was burning bridges. Mutual friends distanced themselves. Some even unfollowed her online. And then, finally, Matt moved out. For good. Jessica? Completely alone. After Matt officially moved out, Jessica's downward spiral only got worse. She blamed everyone but herself for what happened, the wedding disaster, the divorce, the financial mess. But apparently, in her mind, I was the root of all of it. So she tried to get revenge. It started with bad reviews. 1-star ratings popped up under my business listing. Anonymous accounts claiming I was incompetent, unprofessional, and that I ruined a wedding. The wording was familiar, and too familiar. Jessica was so predictable she didn't even bother changing her style of writing. But here's the thing, I have real clients. And those clients fought back. Within days, past brides and vendors I had worked with started calling out the fake reviews. They left glowing testimonials, drowning out the lies. Some even reported the fake accounts. One review even said, "If this is about that wedding, I was there." And trust me, it wasn't Emily's fault. Jessica's plan backfired. But she wasn't done. Mom got involved, again. She started pushing the family over everything angle. "Jessica's struggling. You should forgive her. Why are you being so cold?" I ignored it. Then, I did something that completely shut down Jessica's version of events. I wrote my own post. No drama, no name-calling, just a timeline of what really happened. I explained how I warned Jessica from the start, how she ignored all advice, how she treated people terribly, how she tried to destroy my career afterward. It blew up. People started sharing it, commenting on it, supporting me. Jessica? Silent. Well, for about a week. Then, she tried to pull the sympathy card. She started a GoFundMe. The title? Starting Over After Betrayal. She wrote a dramatic story about how she was left with nothing and how certain people had turned against her. It got $0. Not a single donation. Meanwhile, real life hit her hard. She had slacked off at work during the wedding chaos, constantly leaving early to handle last-minute issues. And her boss warned her twice. The third time, after she missed an important deadline, they let her go. She called Mom again, looking for money, looking for sympathy. And for the first time ever, Mom told her no. She told Jessica to figure it out herself. Jessica panicked. She tried to reach out to Matt. Blocked. Then, she called me, crying, begging, said she had nowhere to turn. I let it go to voicemail. In the end, she had no choice but to move back home. Our parents let her stay, but only under strict conditions. No handouts. No endless complaining. She had to get a job and start fixing her mess. Jessica went quiet. People avoided her. Friends distanced themselves. She was the cautionary tale now. And while her life collapsed, mine took off. The viral wedding disaster. It got me noticed. A high-profile client reached out. The budget? More than Jessica's entire wedding cost. My business? Thriving. Jessica? Watching from the sidelines. Then, out of nowhere, she tried befriending me again. Acting sweet. Acting like she wanted to rebuild our relationship. I knew exactly what she wanted. Money. I looked at her and said, "You get what you pay for." And then I walked away. Jessica? Broke. Unemployed. Alone. Jessica finally hit rock bottom, and this time, no one was there to catch her. She spent weeks sulking at home, avoiding reality, waiting for someone to bail her out like they always had. But that day never came. Mom stopped paying for her expenses. At first, Jessica thought it was temporary, that if she threw a big enough tantrum, Mom would cave. But instead of giving in, Mom stood firm. No more handouts. No more excuses. Jessica had to figure it out on her own. That meant getting a job. She tried applying to different places, but every time, her attitude got in the way. She expected management positions despite having no real experience. She demanded higher pay despite burning bridges in her industry. She hopped from interview to interview, but nobody wanted to deal with someone entitled and unreliable. Then came the final blow. She found out Matt had moved on. Not just dating, actually happy. A few months after leaving Jessica, he met someone new. someone put together, drama-free, the total opposite of Jessica. And that's when she lost it. She went on a full rant, telling anyone who would listen that Matt had betrayed her, that he was already seeing this woman before they split, that he was fake and a cheater. But no one cared, because everyone knew the truth. Matt had tried. Matt had put up with her nonsense for too long, and now, he was thriving. Meanwhile, my business was exploding. After the viral wedding disaster, I had so many new clients I could barely keep up. My name was out there, and suddenly I was booking bigger weddings, bigger budgets, even a celebrity client. Jessica saw all of it. She knew she could have had a perfect wedding if she had just respected my boundaries. And suddenly she started telling people exactly that. She admitted that she should have paid me, and that she made a mistake. But at this point, no one felt sorry for her. She had burned every bridge. Then, her final act of desperation. She reached out to me. One last time. Acting sweet, acting like she just wanted to talk things out. I already knew why she was really there. She needed money. She needed help. I looked her in the eye and repeated the words that had haunted her from the start. You get what you pay for. And I walked away. Jessica? Forced to take a low-paying job she would have never considered before. For the first time, she had to earn her way, no handouts, no shortcuts. She stopped posting online after the embarrassment became too much. People moved on. Mom and Dad. At first, they tried to help, offering to pay off a small portion of her debt if she agreed to a financial plan. But Jessica refused to take any responsibility, blaming everyone else. That's when Dad finally put his foot down, telling her no more bailouts. And this time, Mom, though reluctant, agreed. Jessica had already learned her lesson. Some lessons come at a price. Jessica just didn't want to pay it up front.